Hello, everyone. This is Serious Trivia, and today we're concluding the late scholar Lu Meng Let's Talk Lore series with episode 8 titled The Crossing in White. Now, last time we ended as Lu Meng faked the illness to drop Guan Yu's guard, and to make the ploy more believable, Lu Meng was recalled back to Jianye in October of 219, along with a portion of his retinue. On his way to Jianye, Lu Meng stopped to rest at the military encampment at Wuhu, where he was greeted by the local commander, Lu Xun, who was Sun Quan's director of the Right Guards, or You Bu Du. Initially, Lu Xun was quite shocked to see Lu Meng away from the front lines in the Jin province, but after Lu Meng informed him that he was gravely ill and was returning to Jianye for treatment, Lu Xun offered his condolences before offering his own take on the current development in the Jin province. According to Lu Xun's analysis, he believes Guan Yu to be a prideful veteran who would find it hard to stop his own northern expedition, especially after tasting initial success. This would eventually drag Guan Yu into taking on more than he could handle, while exposing his rear position in the Nan commandery to the Wu forces as he commits more and more troops and resources to the northern advance. Add on the fact that with your illness forcing you away from the Jin province, Guan Yu probably would never anticipate attack from Wu now, and therefore, this is precisely the best moment for Wu to launch such attack. So it is vital for you to return to Jianye to inform our Lord Sun Quan to prepare for such attack, as this opportunity will not come again. Upon hearing this from Lu Xun, Lu Meng was floored, as his plot with Sun Quan had been done in secret up until this point, with no one within the Wu court knowing, out of fear of leaks and spies. This is also the reason why, despite not actually being sick, Lu Meng still told Lu Xun that he was unfortunately gravely ill. While he was impressed with Lu Xun, Lu Meng still decided to carry out the lie, as he would tell Lu Xun that Guan Yu was still too strong for us to attack, especially given his growing popularity and support after his recent string of successes in his campaign. But the important thing to come out of this conversation between Lu Meng and Lu Xun is that after Lu Meng returned to Jianye, he would immediately recommend Lu Xun as his replacement in the Jin province to Sun Quan, as not only was Lu Xun's analysis top-notch, his desire to attack Guan Yu also matched Lu Meng's goals. Additionally, given Lu Xun's youth and lack of experience and reputation, his appointment in Lu Meng's place would further numb Guan Yu to the possibility of a Wu attack. So, not long after Lu Meng's return to Jianye, Sun Quan would publicly announce the need for extended rest for Lu Meng due to the illness and the reassignment of Lu Xun as Lu Meng's replacement in the Jin province. And much like when Lu Meng was first appointed, the first thing Lu Xun did was write a nice long flattery letter to Guan Yu, expressing how much he looked up to Guan Yu, and how as long as he would be in command of the Wu forces in the Jin province, that he would never raise arms against their ally in Guan Yu. And by the following month, Guan Yu would finally give Sun Quan the excuse he needed to formally declare war, as due to the surrender of Yu Jin and his massive army back in August, Guan Yu's supplies had become extremely stretched. So out of desperation, Guan Yu forcefully borrowed the rice stored at the Wu garrison at Xiangpath. And with this transgression in place, Sun Quan officially declared war in November of 219, as Lu Meng would be named as the commander, while Sun Jiao led the reserve forces in support. Now, of course, when we're talking about declaring war here, we're not talking about informing Guan Yu, but rather just informing the Wu court internally, as this was going to be a surprise attack on Guan Yu. And to carry out this initial surprise attack, Lu Meng ordered a small detachment of his best troops to dress in white and hide themselves on merchant ships sailing for the city of Jiangling. Now, the significance here is that despite the constant warfare during this chaotic period between the three sides, trade was allowed by all three sides, and much like how Red Cross symbols today signify medics on the battlefield, dressing up in all white was the agreed uniform for all merchants, as it was customary to allow these merchants free passage. So, using this to their advantage, Lu Meng hid his troops on actual merchant ships manned by real merchants and slipped through the naval checkpoints protecting Jiangning. Once docked, the troops easily suppressed the unsuspecting guards at the docks, as Lu Meng would quickly seize control of the outskirts of Jiangning without meeting any meaningful resistance. In addition to gaining a foothold in Jiangning, Lu Meng would also order Lieutenant Yu Fan to meet the Shuhan officer Fu Shiren, who was in charge of the garrison at Gong'an farther upstream from Jiangning. And using the fact that the Wu army was able to reach Gong'an without any alerts being issued from Jiangning, as proof that farther resistance would be meaningless as they had taken control of the entire waterway, Yu Fan was able to convince Fu Shiren to not only surrender the garrison, but also accompany Yu Fan back to Jiangning to help Lu Meng convince the administrator of Jiangning, Mi Feng, to surrender as well. Now, one big factor at play here is that both Mi Feng and Fu Shiren were worried about being punished by Guan Yu because they had failed to send Guan Yu timely supplies for the northern expedition. So now, with the Wu army showing up in full force out of the blue, it wasn't a hard decision for both of them to betray Guan Yu and surrender in hopes of a better future serving Wu instead. Now, we know this surrender was pretty much a personal decision by these two officers, mainly because there was a group of loyal soldiers that tried to organize an ambush against Lu Meng inside the city of Jiangning, even after the formal surrender. And the ambush almost worked, as Lu Meng completely let his guards down after how successful the takeover of the Nan Commandery went. But thanks to some stern advice from Yu Fan, Lu Meng ended up sending his troops inside the city first, instead of just marching in himself in a celebratory manner. What followed is the capture of the families of Guan Yu and his officers, and the appeasement of the civilians as extra efforts were implemented to win over support of the people inside Jiangning, as they feared that Guan Yu could return with a sizable army to try to retake the commandery. So Lu Meng made sure food, medicine, and winter clothing were provided for free for those with needs, especially the elderly. Looting was also strictly forbidden, as even Guan Yu's private treasury was left untouched. What Lu Meng didn't know is that by the time that they had essentially stolen the Nan Commandery from Guan Yu's northern expedition had also completely fallen apart, as their siege of Fan Castle ended in failure when Cao Cao threw yet another massive wave of reinforcements led by General Xu Huang to relieve the siege. It was only when Guan Yu was forced to retreat that he received news of the loss of Jiangning, and on his march back, Guan Yu would send many envoys to establish communication with Lu Meng, hoping to work out a compromise. Yet when these envoys arrived, Lu Meng only warmly welcomed them, showing them how the city of Jiangning was untouched and how the civilians were well taken care of, before sending them back with letters from families that had their sons or husbands serving in Guan Yu's army. Once the envoys returned to Guan Yu's camp, these letters eroded what little morale Guan Yu's troop had left after their defeat at Fan Castle, as many chose to desert, as it seemed that the Wu army was going to welcome them in with open arms, along with their families that were still living inside Jiangling. At the same time, Sun Quan and the main Wu reserves had now advanced into Jiangling and continued to launch attacks farther upstream at Yiling and Zigui, cutting off the connection between the Yi and the Jin province, effectively preventing Guan Yu's escape back to the Yi province. Guan Yu attempted to ask for reinforcement from Liu Feng and Meng Da's garrisons in Shangyong, but were turned down. This news forced Guan Yu's dwindling force into retreating to the city of Mai, where they would find themselves surrounded on all sides. By December of 219, Guan Yu, now only with a few hundred troops by his side, tried one last desperate escape attempt to flee west towards the Yi province, but by this time, Sun Quan had already sent Zhu Ran and Pan Zhang to cut off all the path into the Yi province, and soon after, Guan Yu was captured by Pan Zhang's officer Ma Zhong. And shortly after that capture, following Sun Quan's order, Lu Meng would execute Guan Yu at Lingju, spelling an end to this rather unceremonious campaign that saw little actual fighting between Lu Meng and Guan Yu's forces. After the campaign was over, Sun Quan would name Lu Meng as the new administrator of Nan and the Marquis of Zangling. 100,000 copper coins and 111 kilograms of gold was also part of the reward, but Lu Meng humbly turned down the monetary portions of the reward. Now, while the result of the campaign is no doubt a massive success for Lu Meng and Sun Quan, most later historians would view this campaign in a rather negative light due to the following reasons. First, some historians view the kingdom of Shuhan as the legitimate continuation of the Han. So, with Sun Quan still technically being an official of the Han court, as the kingdom of Wu would not be established until 10 years later, Sun Quan and Lu Meng's actions here were essentially an act of treason, as they were aiding the usurper Cao Cao while Guan Yu was campaigning against them. Second, even for historians who view Wei as a legitimate continuation of the Han after the forced abdication to Cao Pi, the timeline of communication between Cao Cao and Sun Quan over the attack on Guan Yu would show that Sun Quan and Lu Meng had already planned for this attack long before Cao Cao reached out to Sun Quan for help, and that Sun Quan only pledged himself as a vassal to Cao Cao after the fact in an attempt to deflect the blame and avoid Liu Bei's retaliation. So by all means, the backstab on Guan Yu, when he can least afford it, was driven entirely by personal ambitions and greed against an ally, especially if you consider the fact that the Treatise of Xiang River had already established the new borders of the Jin province. So the common argument used in Romance portrayals of how the Jin province was never returned after being borrowed is simply not historically correct. Furthermore, Lu Meng broke established rules of engagement with the Crossing and White. It is no different if an enemy unit dresses up as Red Cross, press, or human aid workers today to sneak behind enemy lines to gain advantage. Certainly all is fair in war, but there is certainly nothing remotely honorable in this campaign. And to reinforce this notion of dishonor and divine retribution that comes from it, almost immediately after Guan Yu's execution, Lu Meng would actually fall gravely ill, before dying rather quickly from this illness. Now, this coincidence is often used in many folklores to be a form of divine retribution of Guan Yu's ghost against Lu Meng, especially after Guan Yu was deified by many later dynasties. But in reality, there was a very well documented ongoing plague in late 219 that would eventually take not only the life of Lu Meng, but also Sun Jiao, who headed the reserve forces for this campaign, and Jiang Qin, who was in charge of the naval response forces, as all three would die in the span of a few months during and directly after this campaign against Guan Yu in the Jin province. Now, as Lu Meng laid on his deathbed, he did recommend Zhu Ran to Sun Quan to succeed him as the new administrator of Nan before dying at the age of 42. According to his will, all his title land, that included 6 counties, and his personal wealth would all be returned to Sun Quan or to the state, while only 300 households of tax income and 50 acres of land were left behind to his son, Lu Ba, who would also go on to inherit Lu Meng's new marquis title. Not much is recorded of Lu Meng's 3 sons, aside from the fact that the same marquis title got passed around to each of them following the death of the previous brother. None of them would hold positions in Wu or serve in the army, as their clan influence essentially started and ended with Lu Meng. In terms of legacy, Lu Meng would be honored in the Tang Dynasty as part of the greatest 64 generals of the ancient times, making the list with fellow Three Kingdoms generals in Zhang Liao, Guan Yu, Zhang Fei, Zhou Yu, Lu Xun, Deng Ai, and Lu Kang. And by the Song Dynasty, Lu Meng once again made a similar list of government-issued top 72 generals of the ancient time. And with that, our series on the late scholar Lu Meng is now complete. Hopefully y'all have enjoyed this series enough to consider subscribing to the channel for more content on Three Kingdoms history, or simply support the channel by leaving a comment below, or just by hitting the like button. As always, I'll see you all next time. Bye!